Oregon's got a big recruiting weekend, and it starts very soon. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. If you have not already, like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Got some great questions to answer later in the show, including who's the most important return on Oregon's defense? I think I have the answer to that question, but we start with this weekend, which is a loaded lineup of visitors. So here's a lineup of players that Oregon is going to have, and I'll talk a little bit about each of them, but one name in particular really sticks out. So you got the number one running back in the class of 2026, because recruiting doesn't stop, Javian Osborne. You've got Jakeem Stewart, who's the number one overall player and defensive lineman, depending on where you look, in the class of 2026. Could reclassify to 2025. I'll come back to him a little later. Five-star safety Jonah Williams. Five-star defensive back DJ Pickett. Five-star defensive lineman Elijah Griffin. Five-star athlete Michael Terry III. And here's the most interesting one. Five-star wide receiver and current LSU commit Dakorien Moore. So let's start with Moore, who is a name that Oregon fans have had on their radars for quite a while. I certainly have, because he's committed to LSU. Oregon's receiver class is pretty loaded up at the moment relative to the rest of the position groups, because Oregon has got 3 receiver commits already. Dakorien Moore would be the 4th. He would join Dallas Wilson as being the second 5-star wideout in the class. He'd be the 4th wide receiver commit overall. But the interesting story here, for those who may have forgotten or did not know, goes something like this. Rashad Samples gets hired from Arizona State. He's got a tie to the head coach of Duncanville High School, which is where Dakorien Moore plays football. So when Rashad Samples got hired, frankly, I don't even remember every detail about it, but that was kind of the tinfoil hat thinking amongst Oregon circles was, hey, is Rashad Samples going to be able to lean on that connection? Is he going to further that connection? Well, this opportunity, he will have a chance to do so. And I think this is a massive weekend. Of course, you got all these 5-star guys, big time names, and Dakorien Moore is the guy that stands out the most, just because he's the most interesting. I think because he's a big time name, and he could add to what would be a loaded wide receiver room in 2025. Even if Oregon has a decommit or a flip here, the 2025 receiver room is going to be very different than this year's receiver room, because you're probably going to lose all 4 guys. Maybe you keep Gary Bryant Jr., but it is going to have a lot of talent. It's going to have a lot of youth, and it's going to have a lot of talent in it as well. So Dakorien Moore, that's a name. He's going to be on campus this weekend that Oregon fans certainly want to keep their eye on. But another guy I want to go back to is Jakeem Stewart. So Stewart is someone who is reportedly considering, but has not made a decision on reclassifying to the class of 2025. He's currently the 2026 number one player on the defensive line. Everydayers are well aware of Dan Lanning's recruiting prowess for the defensive line with Tosh Lupoi and Tony Tuioti, but that's a big weekend for Oregon. This, rather, is a big weekend for Oregon with him specifically, because Stewart is seen as a front runner, or not a front runner. LSU is seen as the front runner there, at least according to On3 and a couple others. And Oregon, relative to some other schools, is kind of behind. So they're trying to get themselves into the fold, and you get a kid on campus, that's about the most important thing you can do to flip his recruitment or get into the mix of a kid's recruitment. So those are kind of the biggest names, but certainly there are a lot of really, really talented players in Oregon, once again, swinging to get multiple 5 stars in the class of 2025. That should be no surprise. That's the expectation with Dan Lanning and this staff and the way they've recruited over the last couple of years. And you'd think that as they get more established and as they have more success on the field and going into the Big Ten plays a factor as well, Oregon's recruiting ceiling can only go up, which is awesome to think about because Oregon just had their best recruiting class ever in the 2024 cycle. So big time list there. A couple of defensive backs who I've talked about before here on the show, DJ Pickett and Jonah Williams. Talked about Michael Terry recently with Brian Smith this week. Elijah Griffin, little bit of a newer name, defensive lineman, has the 5-star designation for good reason. But something else I was thinking about in the recruiting sense is right now, there are 3 position groups that I think are going to see a major uptick in recruiting efforts for Dan Lanning and this staff. Number one, offensive line. There are currently no offensive line commits in 2025. That's going to change. And there are a couple different names that Oregon's been after, but no one, is on the precipice of recruiting or of committing to the Ducks, at least that I am aware of right now. I definitely expect the offensive line to pick up, not just because there are 0 commits after Sandman Thompson decommitted in the class of 2025, but because that's a position where Oregon is going to need some depth. They're going to lose a lot of players this year, and offensive line recruits are more about building for the future, but still, I think that's going to be a position that Oregon starts to target a little bit more heavily than they have so far. The other position is tight end. No tight end commits in the class of 2025 just yet, but a couple in 2024 with AJ Pugliano and Roger Saliapaga. After this season, Patrick Herbert, Terrence Ferguson, gone. That's a position where depth is important and where true freshmen have consistently made an impact for the Ducks over the last several years. T. Ferg and Maliki Matavao in 2021. Patrick Herbert, I think he was hurt for what would have been his true freshman season many years ago. You talk about Kenyon Sadiq, who could be the number 1 tight end next year. He played as a true freshman this past year. So tight ends 1, and then defensive line. They've got Matthew Johnson, the 4-star edge from De La Salle in California. Brian Smith likes Matthew Johnson's film a good amount, but that's a position where Oregon has gone very heavy over the last couple of cycles. I don't expect that to change just because they have loaded up and because they can add transfers. I don't think they're suddenly going to shift away. So those are position groups that I would expect to kind of tick up in the commits department or the buzz department as well, for those of you that follow some of this stuff online. But big weekend here for Oregon recruiting wise as they look to continue to build out their 2025 class. Drop your thoughts or questions in the YouTube comments below. Hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. If you want priority access to the mailbag and all sorts of other perks, go join the flock over at Subtext. That link is in the description below wherever you listen to or watch this show. Jeffrey Bassa is Oregon's most important returner on defense, and I'll tell you why. I'll also tell you why you should check out Game Time, now an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. You can save up to 60% buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Yet they have flash deals that allow you to save even more with exclusive in-app purchases. Everything you want, Game Time's got it. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets for the NBA with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right. Appreciate you all being here as always. Hope you appreciate a few of the new features up there on the shelves. Going to continue adding to the list. That I need to work on my weatherman skills. Ichiro bobblehead. Of course, you can see the Oregon items there for Locked On Ducks. Let's get into the mailbag. Again, YouTube comments, X, subtext always to get into the mailbag here. This from Brian. Given the complicated defense we run, how much concern is there that some of these portal transfers will have problems picking up the intricacies of the defense in their first year in the system? So let me start this answer by talking about Jeffrey Bassa. That is Oregon's most important returner defensively. He may not be the most impactful player for the Ducks defensively this year. He'll be one of them. But will he be the singularly most important person and the most statistically glaring player on Oregon's defense this year? Probably not. He'll be one of the leading tacklers, but will he lead the team in sacks or TFLs? No, I do not expect him to. And I expect him to have a good year. He was second team All Pac-12 a year ago and another year in the system. I think he can have a fantastic year and make himself into an NFL draft pick after this season. But the reason he's so important is because, as you mentioned, the defense can be a little bit complicated. Every defense has got complicated elements to it. I don't know all the inner workings and whether, Lanning and Lupoi's defense, and you got to put Chris Hampton in that conversation as well, and the play calls and how they get stuff in. I don't know if it's any more complicated than another team's defense. It could be. Lanning's defensive guy. He certainly spent more time thinking about, innovation and plays and concepts and coverages and schemes on that side of the ball than offense. So you'd think there'd be a little bit more to it. That doesn't mean that everything on the offense is just simple compared to what you have on the defensive side of things, though. So I think Boss is huge because he does understand the system. He's been in it for the last couple of years at the linebacker position. And he's going to be the guy who's getting the plays relayed into him from the coaching staff. And I presume that'll be Tosh Lupoi getting things in. There's a collaborative component to it to send the play calls in. But Jeffrey Boss is the guy who is the quarterback of the defense. He's getting everyone situated. He knows what the calls. Hey, they give us this look. We got to shift into this coverage. Or, hey, this is an automatic blitz if they motion this guy here. All that sort of stuff. That's running through Jeffrey Bassa. So that's why he's the most important guy for Oregon's defense this year, even more than, say, Jordan Birch, who might put up better numbers from a sack or tackle for loss standpoint than Jeffrey Bassa will this year. So I think having him there is really, really big. And that helps incorporate the new guys that are working their way in and learning the different calls and the signals and the coverages and everything like that. I think for the transfers coming in, I don't have a big concern about how they're going to learn the defense, especially having a guy like Jeff Bassa there and several other returners too, but mostly Bassa. I don't worry about, are they going to pick this up or they're going to be coverage busts or anything like that. I think the guys that have the most to learn will be Kobe Savage, Kansas State transfer, expected to start at free safety. At least that's what I would certainly project right now for Oregon's defense. And Brandon Johnson, the nickel. Because those are two guys coming into a new situation, and they've got more to learn. Like, if you compare what you need to learn defensively at a defensive back position compared to what you have to learn, say, on the defensive line, I do not believe the defensive linemen's assignments are nearly as complex because they're not, they're obviously talking about gap assignments and shifting coverages or shifting, run fits and everything like that with the linebackers. Like, they have things to communicate and understand, like, hey, I've got outside container. I've got to rush with discipline going to get the quarterback, or I've got to swallow up a double team, or I've got to stunt here. They're a thing, but it's not nearly as complicated because they're not really affected by motion. So guys on the back end of the defense, they're affected by motion, which is, of course, a big trend in football right now, understandably so, because data and analytics tell you the more you motion, the more confused the defense is going to be, and the more success you are likely to have on the offensive side of the football when you use any sort of motion in a play. It's why you see Oregon motion a pretty good amount. So I think for Savage and Johnson, who I expect to start this year, I think Oregon starting safeties will be Kobe Savage, Tysheem Johnson, and then Brandon Johnson at the nickel spot. I think those guys have the most to learn, to understand how the calls work, how you pass things off, and what their zone assignments are, and the key indicators and everything like that. they've got the most to learn. Whereas Derek Harmon, Jamari Caldwell, it's much more about, hey, show up and just kick the other guy's rear end, push him around, move him off the line of scrimmage. I think that's a lot simpler compared to what you have on the back end of that defense. And the other thing too with that, like I think that's a really good question. I think the other thing too is there are so many new faces in Oregon safety room. Like Tysheem Johnson is the only guy that is back from last year's unit. That's a huge difference. No Steve Stevens, no Evan Williams in there. And I don't know if Tysheem was as much the field general that, Evan Williams or really Steve Stevens was. And I don't know who fills that role. My guess would be Kobe Savage because he's playing, that deep safety or, field safety, however you want to refer to it. That's a guy who's probably the last defender. Like if you have a cover 3 call, for instance, your field safety or your deep safety is going to be the guy that takes that middle third, whereas your boundary safety or strong safety is a guy who's going to, come up in zone coverage and play kind of that middle third of the field, or drop all the way down the line of scrimmage and take a flat to hook zone, for instance. So I think for Savage, that's a role that he's got to be able to pick up. He's got to be able to embrace. And, you heard, I think, other podcasters and coaches and players talk a lot about, what Steve Stevens did on the back end of the secondary. Look, Stevens was an awesome guy, had a long Oregon career, was not the most dynamic playmaker, and was not someone who excelled in coverage. He wasn't bad per se. He was just he was okay. He was solid. But the reason that he was really on the field is because he was a field general back there, because he knew what everyone needed to do and could make the right calls and get into the coverage and everything like that, all the little details and intangibles. I think that's a role that Kobe Savage has to embrace, and there are a bunch of other guys that have to be ready to fill in. I mean, you saw Savage get hurt in the spring game going to make a tackle on Jordan James, which, that's something that could happen. James is one heck of a physical runner, as we all know. But if Savage goes down, my question for the back end of this Oregon defense is who steps into that spot? Who's your next deep safety? Is it Aaron Flowers? Is it Tyler Turner maybe? Is it, I don't know, Kingston Lopa, the true freshman? I don't know. I don't know. That's, I think, a legitimate question on this Oregon defense is how well can the safety room potentially survive an injury, even for just, a play or two? Or is it Peyton Woodyard, who, as Brian Smith has talked about, and he said kind of the same things about Aaron Flowers. I think Flowers has got a little bit more game readiness in terms of his coverage skills than Woodyard does, but neither one is taking a snap in a college game, and someone's going to have to play. Someone's going to have to play. I think that's the biggest question for this Oregon defense right now. Who's the number 2 free safety? I don't think anyone's going to dispute that Kobe Savage is number 1. It could be an open battle right now for all we know. And heck, who's your number 2 or did I say boundary safety? I don't know. I think about them as free and strong safety. So that's the way I'm going to refer to them. Who is your number 1? Who's your number 2 free safety? Who's your number 2 strong safety? Tysheem is your top strong safety. Who's behind him? Is that a Flowers? Is that a Woodyard? Is that a Tyler Turner? I think Turner's a little bit more of a free safety, and the other two project maybe a little bit more as strong safeties. But it's why when I was talking on yesterday's show about potential transfers that Oregon could add, a depth piece at free safety could absolutely be a play unless they feel that one of those young guys are ready. And look, they get recruited to Oregon to play eventually. And sometimes you got to just learn on the job. So maybe that'll be a reality for Oregon secondary this year. It's definitely the aspect of the defense I feel the least confident about. I think the corners go several guys deep. I think the linebacker depth is okay. I think the defensive line depth is freaking awesome. I think that free safety and strong safety depth, not sure. Nickel depth, really good because you can put corners there. Solomon Davis, that's another guy to keep in mind. He's made the position change I heard on the Odds and Audibles podcast, and Max Torres has talked about it as well, that he's made a position change from corner to safety. So maybe that's a guy who's on the depth chart over the top. I don't know. But I am more than a little fascinated to see how that position group plays out. But really, really important for those guys to understand the scheme and be able to communicate effectively, like you said. Because in 2022, I think we saw a couple of coverage busts. I think there were several, and it can take time. And Jeffrey Boss has talked about that as well, that, hey, my first year in the system compared to my second, did not have as great of an understanding, and now I do. And guess what? He was a much better player because of it. He transformed his body, but he also was really, really diligent in learning all the nuances of this defense. And now I think he knows it inside and out. So, love that question. Still a couple more questions to get to, including one that, frankly, as I record this show, I don't have an answer to yet. You're going to have to stick around to find out what I'm talking about. It's winner take all time, though, in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Talked recently on the show. Oregon, now an underdog at home against Ohio State, which I find to be ridiculous. A 3-point swing of the line after Oregon added 2 players, one of whom is a starter, one of whom's a depth piece, and Ohio State came out of spring going, we don't know who our quarterback is. But if you think that's as ridiculous as I do, you may go bet it over at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and our official sportsbook sponsor here at the Locked On Network. All right, couple more questions to wrap up today's show. You know how to get in the mailbag. You should by now. This from A Pintor 2. With Oregon's football team enjoying so much national attention and notoriety, how much do you think that alone affects and benefits the recruiting opportunities for other sports such as basketball, men's and women's, volleyball, etc.? Football is your flagship program in an athletic department. That is true almost everywhere. There are a select few universities, Kansas, this applies to Duke, this applies to North Carolina, Kentucky, UConn. I might be missing a couple, but those would be the headline ones that serve at Houston. This definitely applies to Houston, where basketball is the primary draw. It's the biggest sport on campus. It gets the most attention. And there are positive externalities. I am a firm believer in college athletics that a rising tide lifts all boats. It is not a coincidence that in college baseball, for instance, Oregon State is very good, and you can have one-offs like that because, their baseball program has been elite for a long time. Their football program has hit some really, really low valleys. They've had some peaks, but they've gone way up and down. Baseball has been steady because Mike Riley was just a great coach and established that sort of culture there. But for Oregon specifically, it is not a coincidence that you have seen football success over the last 15 years coincide with Oregon being one of the best athletic departments in the entire country. That is absolutely true. The volleyball team you mentioned just made a run to the Elite Eight. Women's basketball just had the worst year of the Kelly Graves era. It's the first time since his first year, I believe, they've been under 500, and they were once at the very, very top of the sport and would have won a national championship a few years ago, if not for a once-in-a-century pandemic. Men's basketball, Dane Altman's never won fewer than 20 games. Baseball got things going once Mark Wasikowski got hired, and the momentum has continued. They're a top 25 program now. And you look at a variety of other sports in the department, it's not a coincidence because football, or whatever your primary recruiting sport is, makes you recognizable as a brand. It makes you familiar. It makes you interesting. And players then coming out of high school want to go and play for that university. And they know what it's all about. And certainly football is a big draw for that. And it's also got revenue benefits because an athletic department is a nonprofit entity. And so football makes all the money. Basketball, I think at Oregon, just barely holds its head above water, but even men's basketball might lose money, and all the other sports are non-revenue sports, and football makes up for that. And that's the way the athletic department works. And you see this play out at other universities as well across the country. So, for example, you know which conference is great, not good, great at baseball and softball, which are non-revenue sports, no matter how good you are as a program? The SEC. The SEC kicks major butt. The Pac-12 is very good at both as well historically. RIP Sweet Prince. But the SEC wins national championships regularly. You know what's a great baseball program? Kid you not, Vanderbilt. Do you know why? Because they're in the SEC. The money that goes to Vanderbilt University so that they can pay coaches and now, NIL with players and have facilities to recruit and everything like that, that comes from the media rights deal from football. You know where that's coming from? Yeah, the big programs, LSU, Bama, Georgia, Florida, everybody, right? Now you've got Texas and Oklahoma over there. All that money is the spillover effect because all that money has to go somewhere. The money that gets poured into football is hundreds of millions of dollars. Even if you have, the best and most lucrative college football program in the country, it doesn't cost all the money that you make as revenue, right? There would be profit, but you can't be profit. It's a nonprofit entity, and so it all works out. So yeah, I think there are absolutely benefits for other sports to Oregon football being really good. There are financial benefits, but more than anything, it puts the school on the map. And then money comes in, facilities get built, and what do you know? Oregon's got a top 25 baseball program. So, good question. Like that one. Okay, as I record this show, I've still been trying to think about what the answer to this question is. And I was thinking about it earlier, and then I thought about it more, and I couldn't come up with it. And sometimes I need to do that when answering a mailbag question because a spontaneous response can be the way that I get to the best answer. So this is from Cheez-It Munchkins. Oh, you guys crack me up. Mailbag question. What is your worst Oregon Ducks take of all time? I love this. Mine is, quote, that Mariota kid looks good, but we would be stupid to not go with Bennett. All right. First of all, mad respect that you put that take out there for me to read on a show that thousands of people consume. Thousands of people just heard, whoever you are, Cheez-It Munchkin, that you thought Brian Bennett was the clear choice over the best player in the history of Oregon football. So, we've all got bad takes. You're always wrong eventually. I've given a lot of takes on this show. I'm just right all the time. I'm kidding. I'm definitely, most definitely not right all the time. I 100% thought that Oregon was going to be able to cover the 17.5 point spread against Georgia. That was a 46 point defeat. That one looks pretty bad in retrospect. The worst take, when I was in middle school, 2010, the perfect regular season, Oregon trailed Stanford 21-3. And I didn't think there was any chance, in my defense, I was 13 years old, but I didn't think there was any chance Oregon could come back and win that game. Jim Harbaugh, Andrew Luck, they're too good. Oregon's terrible. It's all going wrong. Well, that was a pretty bad take. Oregon won the game by 20 points. So that was not a great one. I might have to think on this further as I go throughout the weekend. I'll ask my buddy Zach. He always remembers my bad takes. So someone's got to keep me accountable since I don't have a co-host. So I love that question. I think that is let's make that a thing in the YouTube comments, or shoot me notes on subtext, Twitter, wherever. Your worst Oregon take that you can remember that you just look at and go, it was just wrong. That was just incorrect. This one's kind of Oregon adjacent. I thought the Bengals were idiotic for passing on Penei Sewell for Jamar Chase. Penei Sewell is a stud. Jamar Chase is unbelievable, and the Bengals went to the Super Bowl. That was a pretty bad take. Like, if you give enough opinions, you're going to have a take that's laughably bad. I also, this one not specific to Oregon, but one of my worst takes ever. 2022 season, I thought Washington would go 4-8. I thought if Penix stayed healthy, they could go 6-6, but I didn't think he would stay healthy. They went 11-2, and he stayed healthy the whole season. So that was like a doubly awful take. And I was not saying that just to spite Washington. That is actually what I thought. And that was just blatantly incorrect. So yeah, I gotta keep thinking. I have to have a worse Oregon take out there. I kid you not. I've been thinking about this for several hours, and I've come up with small ones and game predictions or covering a spread, not covering a spread. Yeah, I gotta. Yeah, I'll keep thinking on that one. Love the question. That's as good a way as any to end the show for the week. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.